I'm sitting on the cold kitchen floor. For in the morning, everyone is asleep. The eldest has a test today. The little one only fell asleep at dawn. The middle one is snoring, hugging his teddy bear. And I'm holding a phone in my hand. On the screen just a few lines, couple of words. And my life, like a wounded bird's wing, strangely, slowly, almost silently collapses downward. I'm not even crying. Somehow it feels like I always knew. Somewhere under my skin, under the cries of "Mom, where are my sneakers?" Under the hurried dinners, under the routine goodnight kisses. I knew. There are wounds that don't bleed. They glow. Quietly. From within. I lay the phone down on the floor beside me. My fingers suddenly feel wooden, like they aren't even mine. Like I'm not me. I hear water dripping from a poorly closed faucet. Pick, pick, pick. The room smells like yesterday's tea. And something else. What does betrayal smell like? Maybe like damp grass after rain. Or like a forgotten rose on a windowsill, still looking alive but crumbling into dust at the slightest touch. I lean my forehead against the cupboard door. The cold wood pleasantly burns my skin. I wish I could simply disappear. Melt into the floor, into the walls, become nothing. But I can't. I have 3 children. 3 little hearts still beating in rhythm with my breath. 3 pairs of eyes looking to me for answers to questions I don't even know how to ask. What to do? Where to go? How to live? I have nowhere to go. I know this with painful clarity. There's no back door. No spare home. Only this floor, this dripping faucet, this phone with a few stolen words. And me? Once I thought betrayal was about shouting, breaking dishes, throwing scenes. But it turns out, sometimes it's silence. Unbearable, icy silence. I close my eyes. I see our first dates. His hands smelling of mint. His voice when he first told me he loved me. I see him holding our first baby in his arms, awkward, funny, like he was afraid of dropping an entire universe. Back then it was all real. And then, something cracked. A thin, invisible crack, along which the blood slowly, inevitably started to seep. I don't know how long I sat there. Maybe an hour. Maybe a lifetime. Then I slowly got up, picked up the phone, wiped my face. Though I don't think there were any tears. Automatically I put the kettle on. Soon the children would wake up. They would need to get dressed, have breakfast, pack sandwiches for school. They would need their mother. And I would be that mother. Because right now, there is only one luxurious feeling I can allow myself. I can allow myself to glow. Quietly. From within. My life once seemed very simple. Not easy, but simple. Like walking barefoot on hot asphalt in childhood, knowing that somewhere ahead there would be someone's yard, someone's door, someone's voice calling, "Come on in." I believed everything in my life was right. A home, children, a husband, dinner on the stove, clean shirts folded into neat piles, school assignments checked, floors mopped. There was never time to wonder where I was in that picture. Every morning I got up before everyone else. Sometimes in the dark, tiptoeing so I wouldn't wake little Margot. Sometimes in the half-light when the first bluish sunrise barely touched the windows. I cooked porridge. Buckwheat because Max hated oatmeal. Made sandwiches for Lisa's school lunch. Lisa would fuss if the ham wasn't laid diagonally across the bread. Peeled carrots for Margot. Packed everything into little containers. Routine pulls you in like a river. At first you think I'll just swim across to the other side. Then you realize it's not a river. It's an ocean. And you swim. And you drown. And you swim again. Sometimes I caught myself thinking strange thoughts. When everything at home was finally quiet, kids asleep, husband scrolling his phone, I would step out onto the balcony, hug myself around the shoulders. And suddenly I remembered how I once dreamed of painting. When I was 20, I wanted to move to Paris. Study at some unknown art academy. Wander the streets with a sketchbook. Draw bridges. Old men in parks. Cats on rooftops. Foolishness. That's what I told myself later. Foolish dreams. Back then my husband seemed like an anchor. Said he certain. When he asked me to move in with him I thought, this is it, this is what I've been waiting for. Not Paris. Not bridges. A home. Only no one warns you. A home is not walls. A home is the feeling of being seen. And when you stop being seen, the house turns into a storage room. You put yourself there. Your exhaustion. Your silence. Your hurt. And you smile. Because someone has to finish homework. Someone has to wash the school uniforms. Someone has to remember vaccination schedules. We used to sit in the kitchen in the evenings, drinking tea with jam. He would tell me about his plans. I would share my dreams. Sometimes we would fall asleep before the movie ended. Later it changed. Conversations disappeared. Only tasks remained. Did you buy milk? Can you pick up Margot from daycare? Max has a fever, did you call the doctor? In those words, so much habit, and so little of us. So I believed. Because believing is easier than admitting something is broken. I remember one morning. An absolutely ordinary morning. Lisa couldn't find her charger. Max lost his sneakers. Margot cried because I didn't give her chocolate before daycare. And I stood at the sink, washing yet another endless pile of dishes, and thought, what if I just walk out the door right now? Just leave. And instantly fear. No, I can't. I have 3 kids. I have a house. I have a husband. And so I stayed. I washed the dishes. I fed the kids. I set the table. And maybe, just maybe, right then the tiny cracks inside me started to widen. But I didn't hear them. I drowned them out with laughter, chores, sneakers, jam. Back then I didn't know that one day, those cracks would turn into a chasm. It happened by accident. Completely by accident. Like when you're walking down the street, trip, and before you even realize it, you fall face first into the dirt. It was an ordinary morning. Margot had fallen into a puddle on the way to daycare and was crying. Max had forgotten his math notebook at home. Lisa was sulking because I didn't let her wear mascara to school. And somewhere between making the bed and hunting for a second sock, I remembered that my husband had left his phone on the dresser. He always took it with him. Always. Like it was another vital organ, heart, lungs, smartphone. And this time, he left it. Just like that. I picked it up, was going to run it out to him. He had just stepped out the gate. And then it buzzed. A message. Just one. And I read it. One line. Only one. When will I see you again? I miss you. No name. No details. Just words, and something inside me collapsed. I stood there frozen. The kids running around me. Max shouting he was late. Lisa slamming doors. Margot spilling her crayons all over the floor. And all I could hear was, when will I see you again? I miss you. My pulse pounded in my temples. My fingers tightened on the phone automatically. I didn't scroll further. I didn't dig for proof. I didn't need to know who she was. It was already crystal clear. As if I had always known this moment would come. I slowly placed the phone back on the dresser. Turned around. Smiled at Margot. Wiped her muddy cheeks with my hand. Told Max to hurry up. Asked Lisa not to slam the door again. My life kept moving. Only now, something inside had broken. I dropped the kids off at school and daycare. And came back home. Bone. For the first time in a long time. Bone. I sat in the kitchen, where it usually smelled like coffee and fresh pancakes. But this time, it smelled like emptiness. I didn't cry. I didn't call friends. I didn't make a scene. I just sat there. And at some point I thought, I wonder, how many times have I lied to myself? Telling myself everything was fine. That it was temporary. That things would get better soon. That day I realized one thing. The truth never arrives politely. It doesn't send you letters. It doesn't explain things gently. It punches you right in the heart. Silently. Without warning. And when it happens, you can never be the same again. I did what almost everyone does when faced with a truth they can't bear. I tried not to see it. Just closed my eyes. Like a child who believes that if they hide under the blanket, the monster will disappear. I told myself, maybe it was just a wrong number. Maybe it's some colleague he's helping with a project. Maybe it was just a joke. The word joke stuck to me, like a wet leaf clinging to a shoe on a dirty autumn day. Funny. Only it wasn't funny at all. I put the phone away and pretended nothing had happened. Because, what else could I do? I had no right to break down. I had Lisa's essay to check, Max's bruised knees to patch up, Margot's endless questions to answer. The rest of that day I lived on autopilot, checking homework, cooking dinner, scrubbing the mud off sneakers, repotting a half-dead plant on the windowsill. My husband came home late, said he was swamped at work, smelled faintly of someone else's perfume. So faintly you could almost convince yourself it was just a woman standing too close on the bus. I nodded, smiled. Of course. Work. I watched him eat the pasta I had hurriedly thrown together. Watched him grimace because I forgot to salt the mashed potatoes. Watched him scroll through his phone between bites. And something about that evening felt so foreign. Like I was watching a play I had forgotten the name of. The next day I washed his coffee cup, made the bed, dropped the kids off at school, and told myself, I have to fight for this family. I have to forgive. Everyone makes mistakes. I replayed every article about forgiveness in my mind, every quote about patience, every piece of advice about being a wise woman. And I started enduring. I pretended not to notice his new habits. How he lingered in the car outside. How his eyes no longer lit up when he looked at me. How his touch became mechanical, a duty to perform and forget. I pretended it didn't hurt. But the scariest thing was the silence inside. When pain becomes so familiar you stop noticing it. When you sit at a school performance clapping for your daughter, smiling at her beaming face. And inside, nothing. A hollow shell. I tried to believe it could be fixed. That if I cooked better meals, some more, got less tired, laughed more, that if I became someone else, everything would go back to how it was. Sometimes I sat late at night, breathing in the stale scent of cold tea, and remembered the rare moments of happiness. Lisa dancing around the living room, waving ribbons. Max showing me his first perfect grade. Margot giggling, tickling me with her tiny feet in bed. I clung to those memories like a drowning person to driftwood. But day by day something inside me kept sinking. Like snow settling in muddy water. Slowly. Relentlessly. And even though I tried to believe, deep down I knew. Some cracks can't be patched with pretty words. Some betrayals can be forgiven, but never forgotten. And the scariest realization was that I had already started to forgive him, because I had no other choice. Because in this life, with its children, debts, routines, and promises no one else remembered but me, I had nowhere else to go. The crack didn't appear all at once. Not the moment I saw the message. Not even that night when I tried to convince myself it meant nothing. The crack appeared during an ordinary moment. At noon on a sunny day, when nothing it seemed was wrong. I was standing at the sink, washing dishes, the usual plate, the usual sponge, the usual smell of lemon soap. Suddenly, I looked out the window and realized I didn't want him to come home. Not because I was angry, not because I wanted a fight, but because it was easier to breathe when he wasn't there, easier to be myself. I froze with the wet plate still in my hands, felt my heart quietly, carefully, stepping back, building a wall, a small one, invisible to the eye, but very real inside. Everything looked the same, my house, my kitchen, my children, but somewhere deep down, something had already cracked. That evening when he came home I smiled. I asked about his day, served him his favorite pasta, poured his and at the same time I felt an entire planet of distance between us. He talked about work. I nodded. He joked. I laughed. But now my laughter wasn't for him. It was for the children. For Lisa who was watching us too closely. For Max, who could sense when something was wrong. I realized I had already become different. And strangely, I liked it. I wasn't fighting inside myself anymore. I wasn't asking why anymore. I wasn't arguing with reality. I was simply accepting it. There are things you can't glue back together with pretty promises. You can't sew them shut with golden threads. You can't cover them up with stories about second chances. Sometimes the only thing you can do is admit that your past is not your prison. That what's broken wasn't broken by you. And that life, real life, is what you choose to walk into next. That night I sat by Margot's bed for a long time, listening to her steady breathing, a tiny bundle of happiness, still believing that her mom could fix everything, that her mom never makes mistakes, that her mom will always stay. I stroked her warm little hand and whispered to myself, I will not break. I will get through this. I will be the example she needs. I didn't know then what the future would look like. I didn't have a plan. But I knew one thing. There was no way back. And for the first time in a long time, that thought didn't scare me. It gave me hope. Forgiveness isn't some beautiful act you perform for others. And it's not weakness. Forgiveness is when you decide you no longer want to carry the poison inside you. Even if that poison feels like the only thing you have left from the life you lost. That night I couldn't sleep. My husband lay beside me, sleeping quietly, steadily, like a stranger in a night bus, accidentally brushing against you but never truly seeing you. I lay with my eyes open, listening to the heavy ticking of the clock on the wall, the soft creak of the ceiling, and I thought about how tired I was of hating. Tired of waking up with pain lodged in my chest. Tired of faking everything's fine. Tired of dragging around this heavy suitcase of anger, shame, betrayal. A burden I didn't choose. I remembered everything between us. Not just the betrayal, but the real moments. That first New Year's Eve, sitting on the floor eating tangerines from a cardboard box. Our first trip to the sea with little Lisa, shrieking with joy at the waves. All those small bright fragments. And I realized, they were real. What happened afterward didn't erase them. I didn't want to forgive. Didn't want to let go. I had hundreds of arguments in my head about why I shouldn't. Why I should hold on to the pain. Why it was right to be angry. But somewhere deep down I knew, if I chose hatred, I would be choosing death. My own death. Because hatred eats you alive. Like rust eats through metal. Slowly, relentlessly, without mercy. And I understood, if I wanted to live, truly live, I had to forgive. Not for him, not for us, which no longer existed, but for myself, for Lisa, Max, and Margot, for the sound of their voices filling this house instead of the heavy silence of my own bitterness. I didn't make any speeches, no grand gestures, lying there in the dark. Breathing in the scent of clean laundry, hearing the soft breathing of my sleeping children down the hall. I simply told myself, I let it go. I will not carry this anymore. I choose freedom. And somehow, I felt something inside loosen. Not all at once. Not dramatically. But like finally slipping off a heavy bag of stones after carrying it for so long you forgot what lightness felt like. I didn't forgive him in the way people expect. I didn't forget. I didn't erase my pain. I just stopped making it my home. The next morning I made breakfast, packed lunches, kissed each child on the head. And when I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw someone new. Someone who had survived the worst night of her life and was still standing. And in that moment I knew, no matter what happened next, I would never be the same again. Maybe that was the best thing that could have happened to me. No one warned me that change wouldn't start with decisions. Not with loud declarations. Not with triumphantly facing the mirror. Change began with the way I walked. At first I noticed I was walking slower. Not out of tiredness, but as if I had finally stopped rushing after something. After someone else's expectations. after someone else's plans. I walked the way it felt right for me. And I wasn't afraid of falling behind. Then my voice changed. One evening when I asked Max to turn off his tablet and do his homework, I heard myself from the outside. My voice sounded firmer. Not harsher. Not louder. But like someone who knew exactly what she wanted. And wasn't going to beg for it 3 times. I started laughing differently. Not because I had to lighten the mood. Not because I was supposed to support the conversation. But because I genuinely found something funny. And if I didn't, I stayed silent. These were small things. Tiny. Almost invisible. But together they wove a new version of me. I started drinking coffee slowly. Not gulping it down standing at the kitchen counter between frying cutlets and checking homework. But sitting down. At the table. Sometimes with a book. Sometimes just watching the breeze ripple the leaves outside the window. I allowed myself 5 minutes of silence. And those 5 minutes were my tiny revolution. I started dressing differently. Not because it pleased my husband. Not because I had to look decent. But because I remembered. I loved long scarves. Loose sweaters. And dresses that you could twirl in even if you weren't rushing anywhere. I remembered myself. Not the version that was convenient to love. Not the version that was easy to have at home. But the one who once dreamed of riding a bicycle barefoot. Who wanted to scribble poems in the margins of textbooks. Who cried tears of happiness just from seeing the ocean. My husband barely noticed at first. He lived as if nothing had changed. Only sometimes. I caught him looking at me. A little longer than before. Like someone looking at a familiar stranger. Recognizable. And yet no longer the same. I didn't stage scenes. I didn't make speeches. I just changed. Day by day. Quietly. Steadily. And the most important thing I realized. I was no longer waiting. Not waiting for someone to understand my pain. Not waiting for someone to appreciate my patience. Not waiting for someone to rescue me. I was my own anchor. My own sail. My own ocean. Life was still messy. The bills still came. The children still argued over toys. The kitchen still flooded with homework and laundry. But inside me, there was no more emptiness. I was no longer the Sarah who once closed her eyes to the truth just to keep the illusion of happiness. I was no longer the same. And strangely enough, I loved it. A new life doesn't come all at once. It doesn't bang on your door with trumpets and flowers. It comes in small steps. Almost invisible at first. Quiet. The first step was the park. It was an ordinary Sunday. All morning Max whined that he was bored. Lisa sat scrolling through her phone with a miserable face. Margot fussed, demanding attention. And before I would have said, "Wait, I'm busy. I have to clean. I have to cook. I have to finish everything first." But that day I suddenly said, "Get dressed, we're going out." No plan. No list of errands. Just because the air smelled like April. Just because the sun lit up the bare branches. Just because I wanted to see the wind mess up Margot's hair. To watch Max chase pigeons. To see Lisa secretly smile because we were all together. We grabbed the bikes. Margot on her little pink one. Max and Lisa on the bigger ones. And I just walked alongside them. And I laughed. I watched Max jump off his bike, sprinting over to show me some strange little rock he found. Watched Lisa let Margot hold onto her backpack strap. Watched the sunlight paint bright spots on their cheeks. And I thought, my God, how long have I not noticed this? How long had I been living on autopilot, forgetting to look around? After the park we stopped by a little cafe. Nothing fancy. Old tables. The smell of cinnamon and vanilla. A few dusty plants in the corners. We sat in a booth. Ordered cocoa and cinnamon buns. I looked at my children. At their laughter. At the crumbs on Lisa's nose. At Max's sweaty bangs sticking to his forehead. And suddenly I realized. I was happy. Not because everything was perfect. Not because the pain had vanished. But because I chose to live. I chose not to wait for someone else to make me happy. Not to wait for a miracle. not to cling to the past. I chose to laugh. Here, now. With sticky fingers and crooked smiles and spilled cocoa. The next day I bought myself a small gift. Just because. A book I had wanted back in college but had convinced myself there was no time for. A thick, heavy book that smelled of fresh ink and possibility. I brought it home, unwrapped it carefully, and placed it on my nightstand. Without explaining myself to anyone. Without apologizing. I understood. Small joys are not insignificant. They are tiny bridges, leading you back to yourself. I started going outside more often. For no reason. No errands. Just to feel the wind. To watch how the wet asphalt breathes after the rain. Sometimes I brought Margot with me and we launched little boats in puddles. Sometimes I went alone, letting myself be silent. Life didn't magically fix itself. My husband still came home late. The bills still arrived in the mailbox. The kids still fought over toys. But I had changed. I had learned how to choose myself. How to choose life. And in that choice, there was more strength than in any promise of being perfect. Pain doesn't leave forever. It's one of those things you have to accept rather than defeat. Sometimes it came back to me, suddenly, like a draft sneaking through a house with closed windows. I could be walking down the street thinking of nothing in particular, holding Margot's hand, listening to Max ramble about the stars, smiling at Lisa's chatter about school gossip, and then, phrase, familiar smell, a few notes from an open car window, and the wave would hit. My heart would start pounding. A lump would rise in my throat. Flashes would streak across my mind. The message on the phone screen. The blank stare over dinner. My own strange smile covering up the cracks inside. Before I would have tried to silence it. Run from it. Drown it out. Force myself to think positive. But now I knew. Pain wasn't my enemy. It was part of the journey. Part of the woman I was becoming. I learned to stop. Right there wherever I was. And breathe. Not fight it. Not escape it. Just recognize it. Yes, it still hurts. Yes, I still remember. Yes, it was real. And then let it move through me. Like a cold wave washing over and retreating. I no longer feared the pain. I no longer let it define me. I learned to live with it. The way you learn to live with a scar on your skin. At first, it aches with every movement. Later, it twinges before the rain. And eventually, it simply becomes part of you. A reminder of what you survived, of what you endured, of how you stayed standing. Sometimes I still cried, quietly, into my pillow, so the kids wouldn't hear. Sometimes I laughed, at how naive I had once been to believe in forever. Sometimes I simply sat in silence, watching the night sky from the balcony. And all of it was right. All of it was life. Real life. The morning was just like hundreds of others. Milk boiled over on the stove. Margot couldn't find her jacket. Max left his backpack in the hallway again. Lisa argued with me about her hairstyle. An ordinary day. Messy. Loud. Full of small battles and tiny victories. And yet it was different. After dropping the kids off at school, I didn't rush straight home. I walked. Slowly. Without a plan. Without an agenda. I wandered through the sleepy streets, breathing in the smell of wet asphalt and fresh bread from a nearby bakery. I listened to the distant cries of a seagull, the creaking of shutters, the soft whisper of the wind in the trees. And suddenly I realized I was alive, not surviving, not fighting, not clutching, just living. I stopped at the edge of a small park. The sky was gray. Soft, blurred like watercolors smeared by rain. And yet, there was something stunningly beautiful in that grayness. Just like in life. Nothing perfect, but still breathtaking in its imperfection. I stood there and thought about everything I had walked through. The night I sat on the kitchen floor with a phone in my hand, watching my world collapse. The endless days of pretending, enduring, carrying the weight of betrayal like invisible armor. The slow, painful peeling away of illusions. The small, stubborn steps toward myself. I thought about the woman I used to be. The one who was afraid. The one who stayed silent. The one who tried to patch the cracks with smiles. And the woman I had become. The one who let herself cry, and laugh, and dream again. I smiled. Not at anyone. Not for anyone. Just for myself. For the Sarah who had almost been lost. And who somehow, quietly, stubbornly, found her way back. I didn't know what would come next. Maybe there would be more hardships. More pain. More losses. But I knew one thing. I would never abandon myself again. I would never make myself small again. Just to fit into someone else's version of love. I had chosen the light. Not because it was easy, but because it was real. I had chosen to smile at my children even after the hardest days. Chosen to walk in the rain without fear. Chosen to believe in warmth even when surrounded by cold. I had chosen to love life. Not because it promised perfection, but because life in all its mess and brokenness was still a gift. I took a deep breath of the damp morning air, lifted my face to the sky, and took a step forward, not knowing exactly where the road would lead, but knowing this, I wasn't afraid to walk it anymore. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, so you don't miss more stories that speak to the soul. And please, tell me in the comments, did you like this story? What would you have done in Sarah's place? Your words mean more than you can imagine.